Welcome to Current Conditions with Maggie Hittman. I'm here with Craig Chalquist, who has been a mentor for me, who is an author, and has worked extensively in academia. And we're interested in you joining our conversation here today, which will be most likely focused on the relationship between places and the impact on human psychology. So, welcome, Craig.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Craig and I go back about 10 years when he was a mentor for my master's thesis. And I was using his framework called Terrapsychology to write my master's thesis. And Craig has done a lot of other work since then in developing even lots of books, both fiction and nonfiction, and different frameworks that are, it seems like, largely focused on storytelling, the importance of story, imagining new stories. Is there anything I missed there that you would want people to know?
I make trouble on the internet sometimes, so if you look me up in social media, you'll probably see me somewhere. I have
Yeah,
an
if you,
unusual last name, so just look around.
okay, yeah. Yeah, and you've got the website, the chalquist.com is that still active? Is that where
Yeah.
you, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and the newsletter as
Yeah.
well. Okay. So if you don't mind, I have a few questions for you then, maybe to help people understand the whole premise of terrapsychology and how it might be useful to them in their lives.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess the kind of like the precedent to terrapsychology was ecopsychology. Is that correct?
Eco-psychology and also depth psychology.
Okay.
And for folks who don't know, eco-psychology looks at how we relate to the natural world psychologically. So it brings human psychology together with what's happening out there. And then depth psychology, that's Freud, Jung. I would name Tony Wolfe, Emma Young, a bunch of others who study our relationship to the unconscious.
That's
So,
right. And so what's the next step that terrapsychology takes, right? Because it kind of develops that even further.
yeah, so on the depth house side of the house, like say you're out walking somewhere and you're trying to figure out a difficult problem, and something happens out there, like a bird lands on a fence and squawks a certain way or whatever it is, or even you're in traffic or you walk by a group of people and they say something that you overhear and it happens to be the answer to what you're looking for. So, we wonder about that. And on the depth psychology side, they'd say, well, you're projecting a sense of meaning into what you're seeing and hearing. So it's all about you, it's all about your human consciousness. On the eco psychology side, they probably wouldn't say anything about it at all except are your relations with the natural world healthy or not? So terrapsychology goes beyond both and says, how is it that the world winds up inside us? How is it that our moods, our dreams, our conflicts, our inspirations reflective of what's actually going on out there? And so it goes back and forth both ways.
It's more relational.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was telling a class earlier today, it's not just that something that happens is a symptom of or a symbol of something going on inside me and enlightening me somehow, but it works the other way around too. It's the way the world calls out to us.
Right, right. I think that's the beautiful thing is the conversational aspect of
Mm.
parapsychology. I was just listening to one of your more recent podcasts about the self-development one
Mm.
and how there's like that can go wrong, in a way, or there can be kind of too much of a good thing. And I think parapsychology kind of lets the steam out on that a little bit and makes it more like it's a broader and like personal wellness and health ends up being dependent on so many other factors outside of just like the
Yeah.
individual and relationship to, yeah. So I'm wondering if we can get like a little bit deeper into some of the particulars of terrapsychology then. Like how do you For example, where you are now, how are you relating to your place or understanding the themes that you notice?
So I live in Ventura County, just outside of a little farming town called Fillmore, between Ventura and Santa Clarita. So I'm about maybe an hour north of Los Angeles.
Okay.
So we've been very aware of the fires down there recently. And there was a fire up kind of in our neck of the woods, about 10 miles away, so we almost had to evacuate at one point. But all through this, even while packing to leave, and then not having to leave after all, it was making me remember our weird relations to nature, not just in California, but in the West in general. Um, our Western psychology, and there's exceptions to this, but too often it's like I think of us as kind of like California drivers. And
Say
by the way,
more.
I've lived here all my life, where you're in the passing lane and there's 30 people behind you, and you're just going along, not very fast,
Hmm.
completely unaware of what's behind you, what's around you, what the passing lane is for. I mean, that's how we are with nature.
Right, right.
Yeah,
It's like a contextual obliviousness is kind
yeah,
of like, yeah,
exactly.
endemic. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, indigenous people in this state have been telling us forever, you better burn some stuff because when it piles up, it's going to be really hot. And of course, they
Right,
were right.
right.
So they were like, we've been telling you this for like centuries now.
Yeah, and from the terrapsychological perspective, you have to wonder, like, what, because the idea is that an individual psychology and their mood and their thinking and all of these things are actually extremely intertwined with what's going on in their local environment and the history and even the geology and the climate patterns and all of that, which I think for most people, when you really look at it, is actually very, like, seems very obvious. It's just
Yeah.
that there's like a blinder there. But you have to wonder what collective mood sort of led up to something like an entire one of the largest US cities burning down. Like that what from that perspective, how would you read that, I guess, or even mythologically?
Los Angeles used to be one of the most sacred places in what we're now calling California. So before European settlers arrived, it was a meeting place for tribes all over so they could do vision questing. So long before Hollywood, way before Hollywood,
Wow.
Los Angeles was known as a vision quest site.
Uh,
And now, of course, it's named after messengers, angels.
and there's quite a bit of visioning that happens there. I mean, a lot
Yeah,
of the like birth of enormous ideas comes out of LA
absolutely.
that influence the world. Yeah.
I think more religions, for instance, have been invented in Los Angeles than anywhere on the planet,
Wow. Is that true?
as the one small example. So it's a
Wow.
visionary place that we've paved over. And, when we build here, because of money considerations, we crowd everybody together,
Hmm.
which is one of the reasons I'll never own a house out here. So it's very unfriendly to the land itself. And
Our method of building and piling
yeah,
everyone in. Yeah.
and on top of that, you have escalating climate chaos. So
Hmm.
it's drying out the West.
Hmm.
Before those fires, we had no rain for about 6 months, and it's supposed to be our rainy season.
Hmm.
So there's brush everywhere. So
Right.
all of that is really a pathological way of, well, it's not relating to nature.
Yeah.
So suddenly it blows up, it burns. And it's not the fault of any one group of individuals, it's more the fault of a mindset that we have as colonizers and conquerors.
Right.
And
Okay.
it
That's an
occurs,
interesting way to see it. Yeah.
it occurs everywhere in different forms. So I was listening, fires are bad here now all over the state. If you look at a fire map of California, there's always at least 100 fires burning any time of year, right?
Wow.
So I was listening to Ron Good talk about this a little bit. I think he's still they don't like the word chief because it's the racial piece, but the tribal head of the North Fork Mono people here in California.
Hmm.
And so his people have been here forever. And he was talking about their burning practices in a way that reminded me of depth psychology. Of course, the practices precede depth psychology by millennia, but he was saying we burn so that we see through the brush, just the way our infants see through the weave of the baskets that they are in, carried by their parents, right? So he said it's important to be able to see through the surface of things. And so one of the ways we know when to burn things is we can't see through the brush anymore. And I thought this has, and he was aware of this, so many implications socially, psychologically, you know.
Hmm.
When we're literalists, when we only see what's on the surface and we only interpret in a shallow way, it's like the brush is built up.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that makes me. It makes me kind of think of the Utah thesis, the Salt Lake
Yeah.
City thesis with this with the air pollution and the inversion that comes in, and it's like this fog, this like collective fog that everyone is, and you can't help but be influenced by that. Like
Mm.
your thinking can't possibly not be influenced by that.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good way to explain terrapsychology to people who don't have any kind of academic background. It's to say something like, well, we instinctively go up on mountaintops to have a higher view of things, or
hmm.
we go into the deserts to purify ourselves and things like
Hmm.
that. So it
Yes.
just takes that a little further.
Yeah, like you feel essentially you feel different in different places depending on
Yeah.
and there's like particular and what I like about your framework is that it breaks that down in very specific ways. So
Mm.
there's actually like a methodology.
Mm.
And the I do want to say that the I guess I read your book for the first time in after I'd spent about 6 months in the high Sierras in a trail
Mm.
on a trail crew, and it kind of opened everything up for me. But it really helped me make sense of why I felt like a completely different person in Wisconsin versus Utah, and like the Midwest versus the desert. Is just I different parts of myself came alive and in ways that they were too specific to be just because I'm a few years older now or I have a new job or something like that. It's like very distinct, kind of like this is coming from the extreme geography in the mountains or even like the air quality
Yeah.
and things like that. Yeah.
We pick up so much that we're not usually conscious of because consciousness works like a filter. We'd be overwhelmed if we took everything in. So
Hmm.
we miss a lot. But we're much more intimately related to the land, the sea, the elements than we usually realize. And the first time years ago I went to Connecticut, it was my first trip to the East Coast many years ago. And I had vertigo when I got off the plane because everything felt really steady in a
Oh,
really weird way. And,
yeah.
in California, everything is always moving, and
Uh huh.
the granite out here is the youngest granite on the continent, whereas on the East Coast, it's the oldest. So there's stability. I remember seeing these in Long Island, out near Long Island. There were all these houses built on chunks of rock that were maybe a dozen feet above the Atlantic Sea. If even that. And I thought, God, we would never build like that in California.
Uh huh. Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of when I was living in Santa Cruz for a few years, and I actually flew into Santa Fe, where I am now, and I guess I flew into Albuquerque, but you don't realize the pace at which that state moves until you go somewhere slower. When I got it, when my feet touched down in the airport, I felt like I was getting off of the thing in the airport that you step on to go faster, the conveyor
Yeah.
belt or whatever. I felt like I had just like fallen off of that and just hit cement, because the pace, it was just like it's so slow here in the
Mm.
desert, and the way everything's exposed, and I'm sure like the geological factors are different, and then also the culture that's inspired by that, because that's
Yeah.
the thing I think, right? The geology, like the pace of the culture in California, it seems like there's the geological influence of a lot of like shifting, subterranean shifting, but then also the coastal factor of just this very dramatic end of the continent somehow. What do you think the influence of that is on the psychology and the edgy kind of thing that's happening there?
Yeah, we're definitely an edge place, not only geologically but culturally. I
Hmm.
think it feeds our conceit that, we like to think that Californians are always ahead of the curve and that it happens here first.
Yep.
I think it happens here on the edge, but not first. It happens first in New York City.
Oh,
That,
interesting.
that's Radio City for a reason, right? If whatever's going to happen to the rest of the nation goes on there first. But California is, yeah, shifty, edgy. James Hillman said we're permanently faulted. Um, there's something in us that expects the rupture. Friends of mine in the Midwest and also on the East Coast were checking in to make sure I didn't burn up in the fires, and they had forgotten. I lived out here all my life. I'm used to this.
Mm-hmm.
I can smell smoke like 30 miles away and know that
Oh
I need
wow.
to start preparing. So,
Yeah, you're sort of California through and through.
yeah, I've wondered recently how long I'm actually going to stay here.
Hmm.
So, because there's a lot of things opening up in my life right now in a new way. So, one of the things about a secure attachment emotionally is that you can be away from the people, or in this case, the state that you're attached to, and not suffer too much, because
Uh-huh.
because the attachment is secure, right?
Right, right, right. So would you say that you have a secure? Yeah, I like talking about attachment style in terms of place. That's a very interesting thing, and I'd actually like to ask more about that, the relational piece. But did it take you a minute to get to the secure attachment with California?
About 45 years, but only because I had no concept of it at first. It
Hmm.
didn't occur to me. It was outside my worldview. I grew up thinking places were just backdrops, you
Hmm.
know.
And so you had the psychological background though, because you were in practice so you were aware of attachment theory.
Oh yeah, yeah.
At what point did you begin applying that to places?
I guess around the year 2000 when I started thinking through what became Terrapsychology
Okay.
along with Matt Cochran and Lolly Mitchell. We were all at Pacifica and put in touch with each other. So around then, um, I started doing that, realizing that some of these psychological ideas apply to place as well.
Yeah.
And Matt and Lolly were having the same insights that I was at the same time. So we were all talking about that. Like Lolly was doing petroglyph-inspired art with her art therapy students,
Wow.
and talking about the place, which was Escondido, California, as being part of the artistry. That we need to partner with it to do art.
Yeah. Yep.
And then Matt translating geology into psychological terms and vice versa. So we were all kind of getting different pieces of it.
Hmm.
And then since then talking to a lot of indigenous people from different cultural groups about their knowing, since they have their own version of this, the ones that are in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, at base, it seems like kind of like you've done a great job of conceptualizing what's like essentially an indigenous understanding.
Yeah, sometimes we've been reached out to by, this happened to me in California. There's a group that they're not federally recognized and they were all but destroyed in the gold rush. And they lost not only their lands, which are now parks, but um, they lost a lot of their lore and ritual. And so they came to me to ask me if they could use terrapsychology to get some of it back.
Wow.
And so they're now doing that. And part of what I told them was, well, once you know how to listen, the land will teach you about all that. So, and it did. So, I think that's part of the good news in all this is that it's retrievable.
Yes. Yes. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. One thing I want to ask you about the attachment theory and the terrapsychology is like, okay, so we're in a relationship with the places that we are, no matter whether we're conscious of that or not. That's one thing. I have noticed in my experience that I see my relationships with place tend to be almost like romantic relationships. Like it has that level of like intensity and sometimes
Yeah.
unconsciousness as well. Is that your experience as well, or do you think it varies by individual?
Um, it might vary by individual. Places kind of get into us in whatever way they can.
Yeah.
Their presence. I tend to think of it animistically, but not everybody does. So sometimes it's enough to just say the place has a presence that we are participating in. It
Hmm.
has a discourse or whatever.
Hmm.
But plenty of times I've noticed that, like if I have a relationship in a particular place, it tends
Yeah.
to reflect dynamics that
I
are
was
happening
just
in
gonna
that
say that. I mean, even sometimes the physical features of people to me,
place.
like I was like, there was one relationship I was like, this man is the Wasatch Front. Like the severe features and even the coloring, it's like, and how I kind of felt in his presence was like, it just felt like he was the embodiment of the mountain range
Yeah.
itself. So yeah, I wonder, what do you suggest for people for developing a healthy attachment style to the places that they live?
Doing the homework on the place itself, first of all, like what is there?
Hmm.
And the bioregional people have a lot to say about that. Where, what's the flora, the fauna? Permaculturalists say who lives here during
Hmm.
different times of the year. Really getting to know the place in terms of the specific details. What's the geology here? What do the original people say about it? What's the history and all of that? And you'll notice common themes. Another thing about our culture is we tend to be really literal minded. So we need to access some of that symbolic or metaphoric consciousness. And, if you're living near a peak, what's peaking in you and stuff like that, being
Hmm.
able to think that way, that helps a lot. And I think once we begin doing that, well, one thing that always happens to me and a lot of other people is the places start showing up in my dreams as characters. Because the mind has that ability that Jung noticed that it can turn just about any experience into a person. So wherever I live, I get visited in dreams by dream characters who basically are the presence of the place.
Hmm.
And then through all of that work, you can start telling the difference between them and human beings who live there, which is really important. It's kind of like, that's a good example. It's like when we have these projections onto other people, like say romantic partners, we want them to be deities. I'm in love with Sophia, or I'm in love with the love goddess Freya, or whatever, and it's actually a human being underneath all that.
Hmm.
So if you have no relationship to these bigger figures, then you can't tell the difference.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Um, there's
That's
something else I was gonna ask. Go ahead.
actually I have an anecdote. So I took a friend of mine to a while back to Modesto, California, and to look around because she had some history there, but never looked at it terrapsychologically. And when we were there, we visited a couple of historic places, and one of the docents was dressed up in like 1800s costume, and she promptly totally fell for this guy. um, they spent all this time talking, and he liked her. So
Uh-huh.
she knew this work well enough that when we had lunch afterwards, and she was like, I'm thinking about moving here. She lived on the coast, and I said, well, you know that this is the place reaching you, right? And she goes, well, what'll happen? And I said, well, there's no rule against having a relationship with somebody who's got that charge. But
Hmm.
I think maybe 3 or 4 years from now, when you know the place better, you're going to wake up in bed next to this guy and go, what am I doing?
Yeah. So that's where when there's that charge, it's an indication that there's some kind of the
Yeah.
unconsciousness is there in
If
the
we
relationship.
expressed it in animistic terms, it's like the presence of the place wants you to know it. So
Mm.
while she was busy doing that, this woman came out of the building in a period dress, like this old-fashioned Western costume, and I was immediately drawn to her. And and the back of my mind, or not even the back, I guess it's the front of my mind now, was like, where this road goes, right? So
Mm.
I wasn't.
Wow, it's so enticing. That's difficult. That's a skill to be able to kind of back off of that.
Yep.
This is what I was going to ask. I was thinking of, in both the Vedic system, I would say, and in indigenous system, there's this kind of sophisticated system of reciprocity, I think, with
Hmm.
places and how to like offer to whatever that specific presence of place is. And where are you at with all of that? And how might like individual, because that seems like an essential piece of the conversation and one that I'm definitely still working on. So I'm wondering what you have for tips or thoughts on that.
I think we always have to give something back.
Yeah.
These places let us live here. They sustain us in other ways. They work on our behalf in ways we don't even fully fathom, and I think we need to give something back. I do a lot of it through my writing and teaching.
Hmm.
So a lot of the places I've lived show up regularly in my writings, my books, my lectures, things like that. But some places are so damaged you need to get involved in repair. So whatever's going on at the local level to help those places come back to life is really good work.
So it can be very practical environmental
Yeah,
support and projects on the ground.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking also in like I just where I am, and there's so many indigenous populations, and that in various ways have their own things going on that could be supported as well. Since
Yeah.
it seems like there's a little more contact. You know, when I drove into New Mexico for the first time, I had the sense that this is a place that is being tended.
Yeah.
It was like
Yeah.
very obvious to me. And I think because I had felt essentially kicked out of California, I felt like I was absolutely booted out of California. And I had the same experience in Hawaii, whereas like this place is like having a reaction to me, and I have no choice but to go. New Mexico, I just noticed a drastic difference in actually being kind of pulled in, and then also the sense of the land itself being alive. And I'm still learning a lot about being here, but it's amazing to me how like even constructed borders, like state borders, have an influence. There, each state has its own personality and like
Yeah.
rules and things that hold within those boundaries.
Yeah, there's something in the place that moves below the consciousness of the people who colonize it. So oftentimes, for instance, I'm fully supportive of indigenous attempts to get the ancestral names back of places and mountains and things like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And at the same time, what we end up naming places unconsciously pays homage to what's really there. So like the case of Los Angeles that we were talking about earlier is an
Yes,
example of that.
yes.
It's like the place is smarter than the colonizers, you know?
Yeah, it's like that organic thing always has to be bubbling up somehow, even if we think we're doing something special.
Yeah, yeah,
Which in a way is sort of reassuring, I think. That like
yeah,
nature triumphs in the end.
yeah. But it's nice to be welcome to a place too. I presented to friends of Young out in Eugene, Oregon, and I had been in
Uh-huh.
Oregon before, mostly to Portland. Hadn't been in Eugene before, so I went out there. Was presenting archetypes of place and planet for them, and then I did a half-day workshop afterwards. And the whole time I was there, I felt like people were just coming out of the woodwork to be nice to me, and um, just one thing after another. I felt like the place was welcoming me and supporting
Mhm.
me, and
Mhm.
saying maybe live here, and so it's on my list of possibles if I leave California.
Yeah, and I think that's something people on a basic level could be, if parapsychology is new to them, like as you're
Yep.
visiting different places. Like, and I hadn't been back to Wisconsin for a while, but where I'm from, but I went back there, and it had been, I think, almost 3 years maybe since I had been back. And there's something about the place that you came from as well, like that I could just feel like I somehow did not need to justify my own existence. It was like everything was just there's this assumption that was very settling, like this is where I belong. Even though I'm not like, I don't think I could live in Wisconsin anymore, but there's something about the home place as well and the energy of that. It probably, is also modified by whether or not you had a positive
Yeah.
upbringing experience.
Yeah. Speaking of attachment theory, I mean, I went through, as you know, a really strange adoption.
Hmm.
My birth mother was basically an international criminal at one point. So no contact with her. I did get in touch with everybody else, but on top of that, growing up in a house with domestic violence in it for 18 years. So, learning about attachment that way by not having a good one,
Uh-huh.
and then, going through years of therapy to heal from that. And so there's a certain amount of emotional baggage I carried into my relationships with San Diego, California, and others, and it's taken a while to settle. On top of that, a couple of years ago, I got an urge to move back to San Diego.
Hmm.
I love the place. It's home, I know how to be there. And there was something that happened while I was trying to go there that blocked me. And then I asked for a dream. And a dream figure who I strongly associate with San Diego showed up and said, "You can't come back. You
And
can't come back."
was there a reason?
They didn't say. I now know, I think, what the reason is because I belong somewhere else. So I think that's the reason. But, to someone with my background, it was an ouch.
Yeah, I was gonna say, was that painful?
Yeah, somewhat. But I've had so much therapy and I've, friends to talk to about all this and everything. So, after I woke up and was really sad, and after a few hours, I was kind of like, well, I shouldn't take this personally. I need to be somewhere else.
And you
But
have found that you have found that to be the case?
I've very recently I had a dream, and I'm not. I think I know which place this is, but I'm not sure. Where a feminine figure showed up and said, "You should live here." So I'm still sitting with that, seeing what happens. But even for people who don't remember their dreams, I think we've all had the experience of you visit a town and nothing goes right, or you even move to a place and it's like it's just hell, and it's I can't wait to get out of this place. It's like the place itself hates you.
Yeah, well, that's what I felt at the end of being in Santa Cruz.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, I had taken a picture that I looked back at when I moved to Santa Cruz. After a friend had told me she felt like there was a dark vortex there, which I didn't understand at the time what she meant. But then I looked back at that picture, and it was like the cloud cover looked exactly like a demon hovering over the wharf. It was like very human and dark and ominous and actually terrifying when I saw that
I've
picture.
never, I've never lived there, but I've been there a bunch of times, and
Uh-huh.
it's got a very troubled past. And
Okay.
it's a very reactive place.
Yeah, and I really got that reactivity. I think I think I told you for the first time in my life I was very nearly assaulted in the woods.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
almost got hit by a car a couple of times in Santa Cruz.
wow. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then the dream I think before I left, then maybe the night before I finally left was also very violent. I was almost attacked by a man with a gun in the dream. It was like,
ugh,
and actually a series of unfortunate events happened there. So at a certain point you can't ignore that it just doesn't seem like the right fit. But
it really makes plain too how what a lack there is in our culture that we don't have a framework for understanding that the way indigenous people do,
right.
who live in intact tribes, for instance, because they would immediately, like a Western Apache person who is raised that way traditionally, they'd be like, "This place doesn't like me."
Yeah, right. I mean, that is critical information just for,
Yeah.
I wonder how many people's lives could be improved by just having that kind of basic information. Like, those things mean something.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Do you think that, can people have like healthy attachment styles and human relationships if they've not resolved their attachment style to the places that they live, or is that relationship foundational, would you say?
Mm, for some of us, I think it would be for me, but I don't think for everybody. And some places are kind of neutral that way. Like they don't seem to really care if you're there or not.
That's probably like Midwest. Midwest very laid back, kind of like, oh, what do you know? No big deal.
It's like Nebraska. Oh, you're here again. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like Santa Cruz, maybe other coastal places. It seems like the places that are very extreme in one way or another, like ecologically or geologically. Utah has the religious headquarters for the Mormon religion. There's other extremes like that, and certainly places in the Middle East and things like that may be more touchy.
Yeah, places that have been mistreated in particular. Santa Cruz has been mistreated for a long time. Polluted river. I mean, all the way back to the mission days. The first
Right.
missionaries built a mission near the ocean, and a storm came along and washed it into the sea. You'd think they would take the hint, but
Right.
according to their cultural framework, God was teaching them a lesson or something. So they built it.
That's that particular type of obstinacy is very interesting. I think that's kind of getting to the root of something where it's like, do we want to actually listen to the messages? Yeah, and
Yeah,
so pertinent for this current time in history when the messages seem to be getting louder and louder.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Craig, I'm wondering what's next for you in your investigations.
What's next for me? I think listening more into where I should be and what kind of mayhem I should get into. I'm not sure where in the world I'll go. I'm not confining it to California or even to the United States, especially now.
Hmm.
So I may end up. I don't know. I really love Ireland.
You
Um,
know, that podcast, the self-development podcast, had that Irish music in the beginning. It was very, it just seemed very like consistent with you for some reason.
yeah, yeah. I love Ireland and the people. They're just. So I got to be there. I guess it was August. I led an eco spirituality retreat in Donegal on the northwest coast of Ireland, and that was fun and challenging. And that trip in particular really gave me a sense of what a magical place that is.
Is
And
it
then,
somehow more, is it another place that you feel like is tended?
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're going through, like, say you're driving through Ireland, and especially the Republic, although this happens in Northern Ireland too, but so you go by a farm and you'll notice that there are stands of trees or bushes all by themselves right in the middle of a field, and an American farmer would just take the tree out, because it interferes with you know,
The efficiency.
harvesting the crops.
Yeah.
But the Irish never do that, and so you ask them why, and they're like, because the fairies live there, and you ask them, well, do you still believe in the fairies? And sometimes they'll say something like, well, I don't actually, but just in case.
Yeah, well, then it seems like they have their stories, and their stories are very much alive, like the lore of that place.
Absolutely, yeah, and they know the lore, a lot of it. So
Yeah.
um, Ireland, by the way, terrapsychologically is really interesting if you go back far enough, like millions of years ago. So Ireland used to be two islands down near the equator underwater. And so there was a sea in between them called the Iapetus Sea, which is named after the god of heaven and earth. And so over millions of years, these two geologically very different places fused. And so roughly corresponding to Northern Ireland is the part that's very volcanic, which you can actually see when you go to places like the Giant's Causeway. But the granite of the Republic part, the southern part, is actually much older and much stabler. And so these two things that have fused together make me wonder about all kinds of things going on in Ireland, including that there's a north and a south, obviously. And so I talked to some people there about that, and I said, do you imagine ever being one unity again, and that way? And for the most part, they'll say something like that they're not against it, but because of Brexit, the economics just make it impossible right now, and the politics, and. So there's not as much religious polarization as there was in the past, but there's economics.
Okay, so we technological issue fixed. You were discussing Ireland.
Mm.
Anything else? Did you finish that up?
I think so. I'm so charmed by Ireland, I could talk about it forever, but I think that's good.
Okay. Yeah, the last thing I think I'm interested in just hearing your perspective about is like what you're talking about, the themes of Ireland and the geologic history, how that informs the current situation there. What about the U.S. and what do you see as the major themes and you know obstacles and issues that we need to resolve? That like I'm particularly interested in how the cultural piece, like the division, is somehow seated maybe in something deeper.
Yeah. So if I could use a local example for a national one, one of the things I notice about Los Angeles is how heavily paved over it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much more horizontal than vertical, and it's as though at an unconscious level the presence of the place is so transformative and spiritual even that the people who colonized and settled it couldn't stand the intensity of it, and they paved it all over, right?
Wow.
So likewise, the U.S. Is a land that is so ecologically diverse. It's one of the most diverse places on Earth that way. Every climate, everything you could think about ecologically, it lives here somewhere, right? And so I think that something similar has happened with the U.S. And there's been, on the one side, people who love ecological and cultural diversity and just have no problem with it at all. And on the other, there are people here who have a more colonizer mentality who can't stand any of that and they're fighting against it. And they don't understand that, the way the founders put it, it more or less speaks to this e pluribus unum, out of many one. I would say unity in diversity would be maybe a shade more accurate. I think that's absolutely central to the soul of this place. I think that's where we are.
I mean, we named ourselves the United States. So it's
Yeah,
like that seems very ironic to me. That like
yeah,
that it seems like unity is what we're after, but that's also the potential like downfall or point of contention that keeps surfacing in different ways.
absolutely. And we didn't name it the United States. We named
Right.
it states.
Ah, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
So I think it's a naturally welcoming place. That's why people come here. That's unfortunately why the settlers came here, but they decided, as one historian put it, that they wanted to have their way with paradise.
They couldn't shed that the habituated mentality they came in with. Would you
Yeah,
say?
they wanted to just conquer it.
Yeah.
So that's alive and well. I mean, it's been around for centuries.
Hmm.
And with that comes racism and misogyny and homophobia and all the other diversity killing things about us as a nation. So we're fighting against our deepest nature, which is to welcome diversity and let difference be our unifying point.
Yeah, it makes me think about like my experience and how each state has this really distinct personality, and I don't know, I haven't traveled enough in other places to know if that's the case in other countries around the world, but I almost do feel like each state can be sort of its own country in a way, and maybe that
Yeah,
is part of what you're speaking to. Like it's a very rich diversity in places that are, this close.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, to use Ireland as an example, you know, there's there are dialects in each county, and even within counties, different dialects of Irish. And when I hear people from Northern Ireland speak, I can tell the difference. And even in Dublin, there's, whether you're from the north or from the south, you can hear the difference. So there's diversity there.
Mhm.
But crossing back and forth between Northern Ireland and the Republic, doesn't feel to me like as big a change as when I go from here to Arizona.
Okay. Yep.
So there's something here that's very diverse. Even just within California, you see that too.
Yeah.
So I think we're fighting that, and I think some of that leaked into the vision of the founding of the country. So I mean, when you read the letters of the people like we like to call founding fathers, they argued with each other constantly. And I can't remember, I think it was Adams, and they all spoke to this, that the experiment is one of controlled argumentation.
Mm.
We're here to really collide and have our differences come out and have painful conversations, and nobody walks away from it getting everything they want. And that was their vision of how a democracy should work.
That's very interesting.
So it reflects the diversity of the country too.
Uh-huh. Wow. Yeah, I wonder how the terrapsychological piece and each person becoming a little bit more in better relationship to their place could modify that contention in the conversation, and maybe make it a little more productive. But
There's this is going to sound mystical to some people, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I'm going to lean on what I said earlier about dreams and personification. And this appears in my novel Soul Mapper, by the way. I gave this to one of the characters. So there was this woman who showed up in my dreams for some months, who was a new character, and this happened about a year or two ago, and I didn't recognize her, didn't know which place she might represent, which part of me or anything. She always had kind of bronze-colored skin. Sometimes showed up as Indian, sometimes as Mexican, always speaking English. And I got into an argument with her once because it started to look like things were really going to go south politically in the country. And I was like, well, that's what empires do. I mean, they eventually fall, right? And she didn't like that. and she said, you need to fight for what you think your vision is, and everybody else's vision should be here. The diversity and all the rest of it, right?
Interesting.
So as I was waking up, it reminded me of a dream I had about San Diego many years ago that kind of started all this. I asked her who she was, and she said, USA. And I woke up and I was like, I spent a morning like, trying to put it together, and does that remind me of a goddess of any kind from mythology and this and that and this? And so I was writing in my journal about it, and when I wrote her name, I wrote USA. And I went, my country is talking to me in my
Wow.
dreams. So that was,
That's a very hopeful thing, I think. Like
yeah.
if you have access to that, if we can have access to that.
And I think it's something we can all do if we ask for it. It's
Uh-huh.
not, because there's some people who are this or that, I mean, anyone can do this. So,
Absolutely. Yes. This is something I would like to go deeper with you at some point.
mhm.
Um, but I think this is a pretty productive conversation.
Yeah, this was great.